Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. Tonight I'm sharing 10 accounts from people who took the overnight shift, security guards, night watchmen, loan custodians, who walked into quiet, empty buildings and found that some places are never truly empty. These are stories of long hallways, dead monitors, and things that shouldn't have been there when the sun went down. Get comfortable, turn the lights down if you're brave enough, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Story 1. The Crossfield Industrial Park had been half vacant for about 6 years before the company I worked for got the contract to watch it. 3 buildings, maybe 400,000 square feet total, and a parking lot so wide the floodlights barely reached the far end. My supervisor, a heavy-set guy named Donovan who smelled perpetually of microwaved soup, handed me a clipboard on my first night and told me the rounds took about 90 minutes if I didn't rush. I was 23. I needed the money. I told myself the overnight differential made it worth the loneliness. The first few weeks were genuinely unremarkable. I'd do my rounds, drink bad coffee from a thermos my sister had given me as a joke birthday gift. It had a cartoon sloth on it that said, "Adulting is hard," and listen to podcasts with one earbud out so I could hear if anything changed. Building A was mostly empty storage units. Building B had a few active tenants who worked day shifts, and Building C was the one nobody talked about. It wasn't abandoned exactly. It just felt different from the others. The floors were polished concrete that caught the beam of my flashlight and threw it back at weird angles. The loading bay doors on the north end had been welded shut, and there was a thick smell in the air that I always thought was old rubber from whatever machinery had been there before. I asked Donovan about Building C once and he shrugged and said the previous company had flagged it for structural issues. Probably nothing. Standard industrial weirdness. I should tell you my rounds had a specific order. Then B, then C, then back to the guard booth for 20 minutes, then repeat. I'd been doing it the same way for 3 weeks. Muscle memory. So when I got to the east corridor of Building C on what must have been a Thursday, or maybe it was Friday, the nights blurred together, and found that the overhead lights were on, I stopped walking. Those lights were on a breaker I checked every shift. Off, always off. I'd checked them an hour ago. I told myself it was a timer malfunction. I'd read something once about industrial fluorescence cycling back on after a power fluctuation. I genuinely believed that for about 40 seconds. Then I noticed the footprints. They were in the thin layer of concrete dust that settled on everything in that building. Small, bare footprints, very narrow, leading from the sealed loading bay doors toward the center of the room. I crouched down and looked at them properly. They were child-sized, but the stride was wrong, too long, the spacing between each foot wider than a child's legs could manage. And they stopped in the exact middle of the room, right beneath a broken ceiling panel, with nothing above but a 6-foot drop to steel crossbeams. No prints leading away, just a cluster of them right there like something had stood in that spot and waited. I should have left, I know that now. Instead I walked toward them because I am an idiot and I was 23 and part of me was still convinced there was a rational explanation. The smell changed first. That old rubber smell became something else, something wet and sweet that made the back of my throat feel thick. Then the sound started, not a voice, not yet, more like breathing but slow and rhythmic, coming from the direction of the ceiling. I aimed my flashlight up at the crossbeams. There was something folded into the corner where 2 beams met. At first I told myself it was a tarp, a bundle of insulation, anything. But then it shifted, and in the shifting I saw a hand or something shaped like a hand, but the fingers were too numerous and they bent inward, every knuckle curling toward the palm at the same moment like a sea anemone closing. The arm it was attached to was pale and very long, and it was gripping the steel beam in a way that made the metal groan. I don't remember deciding to leave. I remember being outside in the parking lot, breathing cold air, with no memory of crossing the 200 feet between where I'd been standing and the exit door. My walkie-talkie was on the ground about 10 feet behind me, which meant I'd dropped it at some point. I hadn't noticed. I called Donovan from my cell. He wasn't happy. He told me to wait by my car and he'd come check it out. He found nothing. No footprints, he said. No breaker malfunction he could identify. He looked at me the way people look at someone they're deciding whether to fire, and I spent the next 2 weeks trying to convince myself I'd had a stress episode or a reaction to bad coffee or maybe CO2 from the ventilation. What I couldn't explain and still can't is what I found in my car the next morning. My thermos, the one with the cartoon sloth. I'd left it in the guard booth. I was sure of it. But there it was on my passenger seat, and around the base of it, arranged in a ring so neat it looked intentional, were 7 strips of rubber. Not thick industrial rubber. Thin, almost like skin, like something had peeled it from its own body and left it in a circle around the thing that smelled like me. I gave Donovan 2 weeks' notice the next day. He said he wasn't surprised. Story 2. There's a stretch of highway in central Nevada that I've heard people from there call the Quiet 40, though I don't know if that's an official name or just what the locals say. It's 40 miles of near-nothing scrub brush, cracked earth, and a truck stop every 15 miles or so. I got hired to do overnight security at a rest stop and way station right in the middle of it, which sounds boring, and for the most part it was. My name's not important for this. What's important is that I was new to Nevada, new to the job, and stubborn in the way people are when they've just gotten through a divorce and are determined to prove something to themselves by taking the most solitary, self-reliant job they can find. My friend Petra had told me I was overcompensating. She was probably right. The way station was a low building, cinder block, painted the kind of off-yellow that might have once been white. Inside was a desk, a row of monitors showing the scale pads on either side of the station, a small bathroom with a broken soap dispenser I kept meaning to report, and a coffee maker that took 9 minutes to brew exactly half a pot. I timed it. I had a lot of time to time things. The job was quiet. Truckers pulled in, I logged their weights, they moved on. After midnight, traffic died to almost nothing. I'd do a walk of the perimeter, maybe 8 minutes if I took my time, and otherwise I sat with my coffee and my $9 crossword puzzle book and watched the monitors. It was maybe 6 weeks in when I started noticing the man at the far end of the lot. The lot had overflow parking for trucks waiting their turn at the scale, and there were always a few rigs parked out there overnight. The far end of the lot was just barely at the edge of the floodlight coverage. If you looked at it on the monitors, it was that particular shade of gray-green where shapes existed, but detail didn't. I started seeing a figure standing out there around 2 in the morning most nights, just standing, not near any truck, not moving. I told myself it was a driver taking air. People did that, especially the long-haul guys who needed to walk after 14 hours sitting. I told myself this for about 3 weeks. The 4th week I actually went outside to look, and the figure was gone by the time I got to the lot, but there was an impression in the dust where something had been standing for a long time. 2 feet close together, and around them the dust was disturbed in a wide ring, like whatever stood there had been slowly turning in place. All night, every night. I brought a better flashlight after that. Stupid decision, in retrospect, because better equipment just means you see more. The next time I saw the figure on the monitor, I watched it for 20 minutes before going out. It didn't move, not once. Most people fidget, most animals move. This thing was absolutely still, standing at the edge of the light, and when I aimed my new flashlight across the lot, it caught just enough of the figure to show me that it was facing away from me, but its head was turned 180 degrees back to look directly at me. The body faced north, the head faced south, and as the flashlight beam hit it, the head began to rotate slowly, grinding like a gear turning through resistance, back to face the direction the body was pointing. I want to say I ran. What I actually did was stand very still for an amount of time I genuinely cannot estimate, and then I walked quickly back to the building. I told myself I'd misread the angle, trick of the light, long distance and bad floodlight coverage. But the monitors were still on when I got back inside, and the figure was gone from the lot. And the parking lot camera, the one facing west, it was showing a view of the parking lot plus the corner of the building, plus the corner of the door I just walked through. The figure was standing 6 feet from the door, had been there while I was walking back, had been 6 feet behind me the whole way. I couldn't see its face on the monitor. The angle was wrong. I didn't want to see its face on the monitor. I got through the rest of the shift by not looking at the cameras and telling myself loudly in my head that I had an overactive imagination and a history of anxiety and a recent divorce and plenty of reasons to be seeing things. What I found the next morning was this. The lock on the supply closet, which I kept a spare uniform in, had been bent outward. Not broken in, bent out from the inside, as if something had been locked in there and forced its way out. The spare uniform was gone. A sleeve had been torn off and left on the floor. I never saw what it did with the rest. Story 3. Growing up in eastern Tennessee, I heard enough stories about the old Harwick Mill to last a lifetime. My grandmother refused to drive past it, which was inconvenient since it sat right on Route 9 between her house and the grocery store. She'd go 15 minutes out of her way every single time. I thought it was superstition. I thought a lot of things when I was 28 that I don't think anymore. The mill had been decommissioned in the 90s and bought twice since then by developers who both eventually walked away from their permits. When Garrison Security picked up the contract to watch the property while some new buyer figured out what to do with it, I was the one they assigned. Partly because I was junior enough not to argue, and partly because my supervisor, a compact woman named Reyes, knew I'd grown up nearby and figured I wouldn't be spooked by the stories. She was wrong about that. As it turned out, the mill was 4 stories of red brick with a rusted water wheel on the south face that creaked in any wind above a whisper. Inside, the floors were original wood, wide plank pine so old it had gone gray, and the machinery had been left in place. Giant looms and spindles draped in decades of dust and old canvas sheeting. My first round each shift took 45 minutes just because the building was genuinely confusing. Stairwells that ended at bricked-up doors, corridors that doubled back on themselves, a sub-basement that appeared on no floor plan I was given but was absolutely there when you went down the stairs. I had a routine. I always do on these jobs. I'd start at the sub-basement and work my way up because I hated the idea of ending my round in the dark underground. Better to start there and work up toward the windows. The sub-basement was just storage wooden crates stacked against the walls, most of them empty, and a sump pump in the corner that clicked on every 20 minutes and gave me a heart attack the first 4 times before I figured out what the sound was. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. I want to be honest about that. Nothing happened for almost 2 months. I'd almost stopped thinking about my grandmother and her detours. And then one night, coming out of the sub-basement stairwell, I found a crate that had been moved. Not dramatically, not in the middle of the room, just shifted about 3 feet from where it had been with drag marks in the dust to show it had been pulled out, and behind it, cut into the brick wall at chest height, a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like it had been made recently. The edges of the cut were clean, and there was fine brick dust on the floor below it that hadn't been there the night before. I told myself it was kids. This was my immediate and completely earnest explanation. Teenagers had gotten in through one of the boarded windows, moved a crate, and carved graffiti into the wall. I checked every window and ground-level entry I could find. Nothing was disturbed. I wrote it in the log and told myself Reyes would figure out the access point. She didn't find one either. The symbol appeared 2 more times over the next week, once on the 2nd floor landing, once on the back of a door I used every round. I was starting to feel like something was marking the places it knew I'd be. It was the second week of November, cold enough that the mill's bones were contracting in the night air and making noises that sounded too much like footsteps. I was on the third floor, moving through the rows of draped machinery when one of the canvas sheets moved, not from a draft. The windows were all sealed. The sheet lifted from one end slowly, the way a blanket lifts when something underneath it wakes up. I watched it for a second and then said, out loud, because sometimes you just do stupid things, "Is someone there?" What came out from under the sheet was not a person, though it was arranged roughly like one. It was low, moving on too many limbs, and where its face should have been there was instead a flat surface of skin pulled tight across a concave hollow, like the underside of a bowl, smooth and featureless except for one thing, a mouth. Not in the right place. Low, almost at the chin, stretched wide in what I can only describe as a grin because it had no other shape to be, and inside it no teeth, just darkness going back further than the mouth was wide. I didn't run. I pressed myself against the wall and held absolutely still, and it moved past me within 4 feet, close enough that I could hear the sound it made, which was not a sound I want to describe, and it went to the end of the row and descended through the floor. Not a stairwell, not a hatch. Through the floor, like it knew a way through that the wood didn't. I left. I drove to a diner 17 miles away and sat in a booth until sunrise. When I came back, Ray's was there, and I told her I'd been sick and lost a few hours. She didn't push it. The aftermath proof came 3 days later when I finally got the nerve to review the security footage from that corridor. The camera had caught it, a shape moving under the canvas, lifting it, going past the camera. But in every frame it appeared in, the timestamp was wrong. The footage said 3:00:00 a.m. every single frame. For 9 minutes of movement, the clock never ticked once. I requested a different site the next week. Ray's transferred me without asking why. I think she knew. Story 4. The property management company called it a heritage site, which I learned means a building so old and structurally complicated that nobody can agree on what to do with it. The older house had been a private residence, then a boarding house, then briefly a small hotel before codes made that impossible, and now it was just sitting on 3 acres on the edge of Millfield, waiting to be someone's renovation project or someone's problem. My job was to make sure the copper pipes didn't get stolen and the squatters stayed out. My name is Tamaz, and I want to be clear about something before I tell you this. I don't scare easily. I grew up with 4 brothers in a house where the electricity went out twice a winter and we thought nothing of it. I've done security work for 9 years. I have never quit a job mid-shift before or since the older house. The building had 31 rooms, which I counted during my first week because there was nothing else to do and the floor plan I'd been given showed 27. The extra 4 were in the east wing behind a door that the floor plan showed as a wall. Real rooms with windows furnished, just not on any plan anyone had given me. I added them to my rounds. Nobody told me not to. For the first month, the east wing rooms were quiet. Dusty furniture, old wallpaper gone to gray, windows so coated in grime that the streetlight from outside turned everything amber and dim. In the last room, 31, as I'd started calling it, there was an old wingback chair facing the window that I found myself sitting in some nights when my legs were tired. It was stupid but comfortable. The first sign something was wrong was the smell. Not decay, something older than that, something that reminded me of the inside of a clock, like the air had been contained for so long it had taken on the character of metal. It started in room 31 and spread some nights to the hallway, and on the nights it was strong, I'd noticed the chair had moved, not far, just turned slightly from the window toward the door. I rearranged it every time. I think that was the wrong instinct. The third time I found it moved, there was someone sitting in it. I couldn't see them clearly. The room was lit only by the amber streetlight through grime, but I could see a figure seated upright, hands on the armrests, and I could see that the figure was female, elderly, and wearing clothing that belonged to a much earlier era. I stood in the doorway, and for a full 20 seconds I talked myself through a rational sequence of events. Squatter, elderly vagrant, lost maybe, obviously disoriented. Then she turned her head, and I saw that her neck was very long. Too long. She kept turning after her chin had passed her shoulder, kept turning while the flesh stretched and the outline of her neck went from natural to architectural, and she turned until she was looking at me from a head that had rotated 130 degrees and was tilted at an angle a living neck couldn't sustain. I heard a sound come from her, not from her mouth, which was closed, but from her chest, from somewhere inside the ribcage. It was a low, wet, resonant sound, like a word being spoken inside a sealed room, and it vibrated the wallpaper. I backed out. I went down the hallway. I went down the stairs. I got in my car and I drove to a gas station, and I called the management company's emergency line and told them I'd found what appeared to be an illegal occupant and I was not going back in tonight. They sent someone in the morning. Found nobody, as expected. When I went back to collect my personal items from the guard booth, I checked room 31 one last time. Chair was back at the window, facing out, same position as when I'd found it that first week. But there was a mark in the dust of the floor in front of it, 2 long impressions where feet had rested on the boards, and spreading out from those impressions in all directions, pressed into the dust, dozens of handprints. Small, finger together, pressing down flat, radiating outward from the chair like something had been worshipped there. I didn't try to count them. I just took my things and left. Story 5. I was the kind of person who took extra shifts because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with my evenings. My roommate Sungjai thought it was a coping mechanism. She was working on her psychology thesis and found me professionally fascinating, which was flattering in the way that being an interesting case study is flattering. I was 25, recently graduated, and working security at the Branwick Museum of Natural History because it paid $11.50 an hour and they had good free coffee. The museum was downtown, old stone building, 3 public floors and a basement where they kept rotating collections in storage. The overnight job was mostly about checking that the climate control units were running and that nothing in storage had shifted. Apparently, some of the older pieces were sensitive enough that a significant temperature fluctuation could cause real damage. Fossils mostly, and some organic specimens in sealed cases. I'd done the job for 4 months without incident. The basement was my least favorite part, long corridors of wire shelving, dim emergency lighting, that particular smell of preservation chemicals and old bone that sticks to your clothes, but I'd done it enough times that it was just geography at that point. What changed was the preparation room. The prep room was off the main basement corridor, through a heavy door with a keypad lock. I had the code. It was where they did cleaning and restoration work on specimens, long metal tables, good overhead lighting, cabinets of tools. I wasn't supposed to spend time in there, just glance in to check no equipment had been left running. 30 seconds per round. One night in late October, definitely October, I remember because there was a carved pumpkin someone had left at the security desk that was starting to collapse in on itself. I did my 30-second check and saw that one of the specimen drawers was open. The drawers were long, deep, metal-faced, numbered. They contained things I generally tried not to think about too carefully. The open one was number 47, and it had been emptied. The contents, whatever had been in there, were arranged on the table beside it. Bones, a lot of small bones, I thought at first. Then I looked longer and realized they weren't all bones. Some were, but some were other things, dark, hard shapes that looked almost organic but weren't quite, like something between cartilage and stone. They'd been arranged in a pattern on the table, and the pattern had an inside and an outside, a center and a radiating structure like a diagram. My first thought was that a researcher had been working late and left without clearing up. This was a fully allowed explanation. I didn't touch anything. I logged it and kept going. 2 nights later, the arrangement had changed. Same objects, different configuration. Something had reconfigured them subtly between my visits, moved pieces inward, changed the outer ring, like the diagram was progressing towards something. I started checking the prep room camera. It was one of 3 cameras in the basement, motion activated. It should have captured whoever was going in and rearranging things. The footage showed the room empty each time, nothing entering, nothing leaving. But on the night between my second and third observation of the table, the motion sensor had activated at 3:47 a.m. and recorded 12 minutes of footage of the room with nothing visible, but with the specimen objects moving. Not dropping, not rolling. Moving with direction and intent, small bones skating across the metal table surface to new positions. The stone and cartilage pieces rotating slowly in place before settling. On the 12th minute of the footage, the motion sensor captured something at the far edge of the frame. A hand reaching in from beneath the table, fingers spread flat against the floor. Just a hand, nothing attached to it that the camera could see, pressing down like something testing how solid the ground was. Then the hand withdrew and the motion sensor went off, and the next activation was me coming in for my round at 5:30 a.m. The arrangement on the table was complete by then. Whatever the diagram had been building toward, it was finished. I didn't know what I was looking at. A map, maybe, a calendar, something that meant something to whatever had been making it. I photographed it and sent it to my supervisor with no explanation. I don't know what he did with it. I left that job 2 weeks later for something in an office building downtown with no basement and no specimens and lights that worked on regular timers. The photograph is still on my phone. I've never found anyone who could tell me what the pattern means. Part of me has stopped wanting to know. Story 6. I'll be honest with you. I took the job at the Hollowick water treatment facility because my brother-in-law Garrett got me the interview and I needed the income before the month was out. It was not a considered career choice. It was a Tuesday in February and I was looking at my bank account and then I wasn't thinking about it anymore. The facility was about 12 miles outside of town, at the end of a gravel access road that turned to washboard in any weather above 40 degrees. 3 main buildings, the treatment building, the pump station, and an older structure they called the original plant, which hadn't been active since the 70s, but was maintained for reasons nobody ever explained satisfactorily. My rounds covered all 3. The treatment building and pump station were fine. Industrial, loud, smelling of chlorine and whatever else goes into municipal water, but fine. The original plant was the problem. It was a long, low concrete building with a flat roof that had collected about 30 years of moss and pooled water. Inside it smelled like wet stone and something else faintly that I always thought was animal but never found a source for. The equipment in there was old enough to be almost unrecognizable hulking metal shapes that might have been pumps or filters or something else entirely. All of it quiet and cold and connected by pipes that ran into the walls and presumably out to somewhere. The lights were incandescent, yellow, some of them flickering because nobody had bothered to rewire the place. I did my rounds in the original plant as quickly as I could. In, check the perimeter, check the main floor, out, 8 minutes maximum. I'd been doing it for 3 weeks. The thing that started it was so small I almost didn't register it. One of the large pipe junctions on the main floor, a T-joint where 3 pipes met at about shoulder height, had something on it. Stuck to the metal, I almost walked past it. I stopped and looked closer and it was a hand impression. A full handprint, left hand, in something dark that might have been grease or might have been something else, pressed against the cold pipe as if someone had caught themselves against it. too high for most people to lean against casually. You'd have to reach. I checked the pipes for the next 2 weeks. More prints appeared in different locations, always higher than comfortable, always on the cold metal of the overhead infrastructure. Whatever was moving through that building was moving along the ceiling-level pipes, using them like handholds, navigating the room from above. On a Wednesday, I'm almost certain it was a Wednesday because I'd had a dentist appointment that afternoon and my jaw still ached. I did my round in the original plant and turned off my flashlight to check whether any of the old incandescent lights had blown, standing in the dark to let my eyes adjust. This was routine. In the dark, something above me breathed out, long, slow exhalation from the pipe network at the ceiling. The smell that came with it was the animal smell, concentrated, hot, and close. I turned my flashlight back on immediately and put it straight up at the ceiling. There was nothing on the pipes, but the pipes were wet, beaded with condensation along one section, where before they'd been dry, and the beading followed a path that crossed the room diagonally, from the far corner to the junction directly above my head. I left. I did the rest of my rounds, and I did not go back in the original plant that night. But the last camera check I did before my shift ended showed me the original plant's interior camera for the 4 hours after I'd left it. For the first 3.5 hours, nothing. And then at 5:12 a.m., for 47 seconds, the camera showed me the same view of the main floor but with one difference. Every shadow in the room had migrated to the area directly beneath the pipes I'd been standing under. Pooled there, thick and dark, moving very slowly against the grain of where the light sources would have directed them. And then whatever arrangement had assembled those shadows dispersed them, and the room looked normal again, and 6 minutes later my relief came in. My relief said the original plant smelled like the inside of a mouth. She said it every morning for as long as I knew her. None of us ever figured out if she meant it literally. Story 7. The parking garage on Delacroix Street is still there. I looked it up recently, just to confirm it existed and I hadn't invented the whole geography of it, and it's still there, 8 stories of poured concrete, the kind of structure that looks temporary even though it's been standing for 30 years. I worked the overnight security desk in the lobby for 8 months the year I was 29, and I'm aware that sounds like the least scary possible job. Parking garage overnight security. Watching for stolen cars and teenagers making bad decisions. My friend Margaret always said I had a gift for finding trouble in the most mundane environments. This is her favorite example. The garage was attached to an office complex that emptied out by 7 p.m. After 7, I was the only person in the building. The garage had 2 elevators, a stairwell on either end, and cameras on every floor. My desk had a monitor bank. I watched the cameras, did a walking round every 2 hours, and otherwise I ate the snacks I brought and tried not to fall asleep. For the first 2 months, the worst thing that happened was that someone left a very flat bicycle in the stairwell and I tripped over it. The 3rd month, the elevator started going to the 7th floor on its own. I'm talking about the elevator in the main bank, the one that opened directly into the lobby that I could see from my desk. I'd watch it some nights when things were slow. The indicator would show it at ground, then it would move, going up floor by floor until it reached 7 and stopped. I could hear the mechanism. It wasn't a random fluctuation, it was a deliberate sequential ascent. Then it would come back down. I checked the 7th floor 6 times over 2 months. Storage, mostly folded scaffolding, equipment cases, things the office complex needed twice a year. Nothing alive, nothing disturbed. The elevator call button on the 7th floor was mechanically functional. No one pressing it, it was summoning itself. I told myself it was an electrical fault in the call system. Plausible. Logged it, reported it, got told it would be looked at. It never was. The night things changed was the night the elevator went up and didn't come back down. It stayed on 7. I watched the indicator for 40 minutes, nothing. I called up to the 7th floor on the intercom, because there was an intercom installed back when someone apparently thought you'd need to talk to empty scaffolding. And I said, because again, 29 and apparently incapable of learning, "Hello, anyone up there?" The intercom crackled, and then someone said my name, not the full name I'd given when I started the job, my nickname, the one my mother called me, the one that lived in maybe 6 people's mouths and none of them were in that building. The voice saying it was not quite right. It had the right shape, the right cadence, but the resonance was off in a way I couldn't explain if I tried for an hour, like someone had listened to the name being said and then reproduced the sound without understanding what made it a name. I didn't respond. I sat very still at my desk and looked at the elevator indicator. It stayed on 7 for another 20 minutes and then it came down, ground floor. The doors opened. The lobby was lit. I could see every corner from my desk. The elevator doors opened and there was nothing inside. I had a clear sightline, empty. But the lobby smelled different for the rest of the night, cold, sharp, like the air at high altitude, and I kept catching movement at the very edge of the camera frames, not on the cameras. On the edges, in the corners, the parts of the lobby just out of coverage. A shifting that I couldn't track because by the time my eyes moved to it, it had moved elsewhere. I lasted until 6 a.m., which I consider a personal achievement. When my replacement came in, she asked me why all the chairs in the lobby had been moved to face the elevator. I hadn't moved them. I'd been at my desk all night. There were 7 chairs in that lobby, all bolted to the floor on casters, and they'd been rolled, each one of them to face the elevator doors. I told her it must have been building maintenance. She looked at me like she didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. Story 8. My grandmother left me the property because she had nobody else to leave it to, and because she believed, genuinely and without irony, that I was the only one in the family with enough stubbornness to deal with it. What she meant by that, I understood better after the first week. The property was a small industrial lot on the edge of a town called Crestfall. A single cinder block building about the size of a large barn, a gravel lot, and a chain-link fence that had seen better decades. The previous tenant had been some kind of equipment rental business. They'd left quickly, apparently, because there were still tools and machinery inside, and personal items in the small office at the back, a jacket, a coffee mug, a motivational calendar stopped on March of 2 years prior. My grandmother had rented it to them for 6 years, and then they'd stopped paying and she'd stopped asking questions. She left me the property with a note that said, "Watch it in person at least once. You need to understand what you're inheriting. I have lived nearby my whole life and have never set foot inside after dark. Your grandfather did once, he was different afterward." She hadn't elaborated on that, and she'd been dead 6 weeks before I found the note, so I couldn't ask. I set up a cot in the office and did my own overnight security for a long weekend, just to get the lay of the land. Make decisions about what to do with the place. First night, nothing. Cold, drafty, smelling of oil and disuse, but nothing. Second night, the tools moved. I need to be specific, not the large equipment, the mounted stuff. Small tools that had been left on a shelf along the east wall. I'd walked past that shelf a dozen times and registered them the way you register furniture you'll deal with later. Wrenches, a couple of screwdrivers, a box cutter still in its packaging. When I walked past at around 2 in the morning, they were arranged differently. Upright, standing on their ends, each one balanced vertically, evenly spaced. In a line from one end of the shelf to the other, like someone had set them up deliberately. Balancing a wrench vertically on its handle is not easy. Setting up 11 of them in a row without making noise while a person slept 12 feet away is, I can't explain how that would have been done. I took photos. I called my cousin Elena the next morning and described it, and she asked me if I'd considered that maybe I'd done it in my sleep. I had considered that. I have never sleepwalked in 31 years of living, but I had considered it. The third night I stayed awake on purpose. I sat in the office doorway with a view of the shelf and I waited. At 4:17 a.m. something came up through the concrete floor. I know how that sounds. I saw it. There was no crack, no seam, no hatch. The concrete floor near the east wall went from solid to not solid, and something rose through it the way something might rise through still water, slowly, without resistance, the floor accepting it. It was dark-colored and dense, built wide across the shoulders, and it had no discernible face. Where a face should be, there was just the same dark texture as the rest of it, and it moved with a heaviness that suggested it was very dense for its size. The way a wet bag of sand moves differently than an empty one. It went directly to the shelf. It stood in front of the tools, and it was still for a long time, minutes. Then one hand came up and with a single motion swept every tool off the shelf onto the floor. Then it went back down through the concrete. The floor was solid again before the last wrench stopped spinning. I sold the property inside of 3 months, never told the buyer what I'd seen. I've had enough guilt about that to last a while. The home inspector, doing the pre-sale check, mentioned that the concrete floor in the main room showed signs of cracking along the east wall. Fresh cracking, he said, not structural, probably just settling. I told him I was sure that was all it was, and I signed the papers and I drove away and I didn't look back. Story 9. There's a rest area off the I-68 corridor in western Maryland that I worked for the better part of a year. Most of it was quiet, the ordinary overnight quiet of a facility meant to serve people passing through rather than people staying, so there was always a transient quality to the whole place, like nothing about it was quite settled. Truckers came and went. Families stopped for 20 minutes and vanished. Even the landscaping seemed impermanent, the kind of generic highway planting that said no one had thought hard about it. My coworker on alternating shifts was a woman named Fenella who'd been doing the job for 3 years and had strong opinions about gas station sandwiches and almost no opinions about anything else. I liked her for that simplicity. She told me once, on a night we overlapped briefly at shift change, that the one thing I needed to know about this particular rest area was to not go into the woods at the north end of the property. Not the parking area woods, the actual woods, past the guardrail where the facility lighting ended. I asked why. She shrugged. People who don't behave right afterward. She didn't explain what that meant and I didn't push it. For 7 months I didn't push it. And then in October, during a quiet 3 a.m., something came out of those woods and sat on the guardrail at the edge of the light. I was doing a perimeter check, which took me along the north edge of the facility parking lot. The thing was sitting with its back to me when I first saw it, and it had the rough silhouette of a person, shoulders, a head, something approximating a seated posture. I stopped. I told myself it was someone who'd come off the highway on foot, which happened occasionally. I told myself I'd do the sensible thing and approach professionally. Then it turned its head, not looking at me yet, looking toward the highway, and I saw that its skull was too broad and too flat at the top, like it had been compressed, and its ear was not in the right place. Low, too low, closer to the jaw than the temple. The proportions were wrong in a specific, definite way that refused any explanation my brain offered. I said quietly, "You can't be here. This is a restricted area." I don't know why I said that. Force of habit. You spend enough months saying it to teenagers and it becomes reflex. The thing on the guardrail went still. It stopped moving entirely, stopped the small shifts of weight that people make when they sit, stopped the breathing movements, just frozen. And then from behind me, from the direction of the parking lot, from a distance of maybe 30 feet, I heard the same words spoken back to me. "You can't be here. This is a restricted area." My voice, my exact cadence and inflection. I turned around. There was nothing behind me. I turned back and the guardrail was empty. I finished my round. This is the part people always find hard to believe. I finished my round, because I'd learned by then that panicking accomplishes nothing and that motion is better than freezing, and I did the last section of the perimeter and went back inside, and I sat at the desk and breathed until my heart rate came down. At 5:30, when the light was just starting to gray things out, I did a final check of the north lot. The guardrail where it had been sitting had 4 long marks on it, not scratches, but impressions like pressure marks, 4 parallel lines in the metal where fingers had gripped. Except the spacing was wrong for any normal hand. The outer marks were 18 inches apart. Vanilla came in at 6. I told her what happened. She looked at me for a long time and then said, "It didn't talk to you in your voice while you could still see it, did it?" I told her it had waited until it was behind me. She nodded slowly. "That's better," she said. "That's better than some." She never explained what would have been worse. I've spent a long time not wanting to work it out. Story 10. I want to be upfront that I didn't plan to be in the Reinhold building that long. My actual assignment was the office complex next door, a modern building, glass and steel, completely unremarkable in every way I valued at the time. The Reinhold was legacy property that the same company owned, an 8-story pre-war building they couldn't sell and couldn't knock down and had decided to let decay slowly while they figured it out. It wasn't on my rounds. But one night in March, an alarm triggered in the Reinhold's basement, and the protocol was that whoever was closest had to investigate. I was closest. My name is David, and I want you to understand that before this I had done security work for 6 years without anything I would call supernatural. I am by nature an explainer. I catalog, I categorize, I look for the mechanism behind any phenomenon. I'm telling you this so you know that what I eventually stopped being able to explain required sustained, accumulated evidence before I gave up trying. The Reinhold's basement had a few different zones, HVAC infrastructure, old electrical junction boxes, and a section that had been used for document storage by a previous occupant who had apparently abandoned it rather than paying for proper moving. Filing cabinets, banker's boxes, a folding table with a dead laptop on it. The alarm had been triggered by a moisture sensor near the sump system, which was running fine by the time I got there. False positive, almost certainly. I was heading back to the exit stairwell when I noticed the filing cabinets. About half of them were open. I didn't think much of it, abandoned space, previous people clearing their things, whatever. What I noticed was what was in the lowest open drawer of the nearest cabinet, not documents. Photographs, loose, recent-looking photographs, dozens of them. I picked one up. It was a photograph of the hallway I was standing in, taken from approximately where I was standing. The fluorescent light was on, the same light I'd turned on when I came in. Same angle, same composition. The date stamp in the corner was last Thursday. I had not been in this building last Thursday. Neither had anyone else who worked for my company. I checked the logs that morning as part of routine. I went through about 15 photographs. They were all of this building, all recently taken, all showing empty hallways and rooms, all timestamped between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. over the last 3 weeks. Someone had been coming in here, alone, taking photographs of empty rooms and storing the photographs in this filing cabinet. I turned around at that thought, just a full slow turn to check the room, and at the far end of the storage area, where the light faded and the banker's boxes created a kind of wall, there was an eye. One eye. Level with the gap between 2 stacks of boxes, about 5 feet off the ground. Very dark, very still, just present in that gap the way an eye is present, with no other context around it. No face that I could see, no body, just the eye and the quality of attention behind it that was specific and directed entirely at me. I identified it as a camera lens for about 2 seconds. Then it blinked. The blink was slow, lid closing from the outside in rather than from the top down, which is not how any eye I've seen before or since has ever closed. And when it opened, the eye had moved same height, 6 feet to the left, now in a gap between different boxes without any transit I could track. I walked out of the basement, not running, walking. Because something about that eye made me feel that running would be the wrong answer, that it would change the nature of what was happening if I ran. I walked up the stairwell and across the lobby and out the front door, and I stood on the sidewalk in the cold March air and took inventory of my body, which was shaking in a way I hadn't noticed while it was happening. I filed the alarm report, false positive moisture sensor, all clear. I did not mention the photographs. I did not mention the eye. But I went back the next day with a flashlight and enough nerve, and I found the filing cabinet. The photographs were still there. Except now there was one more, added on top of the pile I disturbed. It was a photograph of me, standing in that basement, holding a photograph, my back to the camera, the filing cabinet open in front of me. The timestamp was last night. The composition was perfect, clear, well-framed, like whoever was behind the camera had done it many times before. I've shown it to 4 people, and each one of them has asked the same question: who took the picture? I tell them I don't know. That's the honest answer. I don't know what was in that room with me, or what it wanted the photographs for, or why it decided to add itself to the collection only after I'd found it. I transferred to a different building the following week. The Reinhold is still standing. Sometimes I think about the filing cabinet and whether the collection is still growing, photograph by photograph, the way some things accumulate evidence of their own existence without anyone asking them to. I've never gone back to look. That's 10 stories for tonight. Thanks for staying up with me. If any of these got under your skin, hit the like button and let me know which one in the comments. The overnight shift ones always get people, I've noticed. There's something about an empty building at 3 a.m. that the human brain never fully makes peace with. Subscribe if you want more, share it with someone who won't sleep well anyway, and until next time, keep the lights on. Or don't, your choice.